Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back from lunch. It's so nice to see that you all have come back after lunch. It's always a danger, isn't it? But no, it's really, really lovely to see you. I just want to take a few moments just to say some thank yous. We, at the Housing Festival, myself, Jez, and the others of the team who are here, Ellen, Andrew and Nick, we are so grateful to be able to work with the Building Centre to put on this two-day summit, but also to be able to host the exhibition that's upstairs. I'm hoping that you've all had a chance to go round and look at now. This is, for us, a really massive piece of work that we've been working on for the last 18, 24 months or so. It's been a labour of love, a culmination of multiple hours of conversations, 60 different organisations coming together. And the role we've played really is listening to experts in the field across the industry and different parts of the industry and different industries that our industry touches onto, and trying to bring those experts together, bring those conversations together and collate all of that information into something that we've termed the Social Rent Housing Playbook, the MMC at Pace Playbook. That was launched this time, well, almost this time last year now. And this exhibition that you'll have seen upstairs, hopefully, is really a showcase of that MMC playbook. So if you haven't seen the playbook, you can download it off our website. But really, it is, as I said, 60 different organisations, lots of individual expertise being brought together, really with the hope and the expectation that we can deliver social rent housing at pace. And that has been the theme of this summit, and we've seen people speaking to that over and over and over again across these 2 days, and it is filled with hope. There is so much opportunity. I've heard people talking about things that are not just theory, but actually being done in the real world, and now we need to see that scaled. And that comes when we come together. So summits like this, being able to make new friends, have conversations over the breaks, become real catalysts for seeing that scale happen. And that's what we are hoping for. So I want to say another thank you to you for coming. That is what has made this summit really quite something. And so thank you for being here. It's been really, really quite a big deal to see this really come into fruition. We talk a lot about the ecosystem solution within that playbook, and you'll see that in the exhibition upstairs as well. That ecosystem solution being bringing together land, finance, and a new supply chain of housing. And we really do believe that you've got to bring those things together to make this work. And we've got people in the room from all sorts of different parts of that area, which is how it's all going to come together and how it's all going to work. We need systemic change, but actually we need us to be all on board with that to see that really, really happen. And you'll have seen across the 2 days all the different sessions of the summit hanging on those themes, and we're not done yet. So I am very delighted to be able to introduce Alex Notay to the stage this afternoon, who is going to open our afternoon. Alex is an incredibly gifted individual who we are delighted to bring to the stage. She's an award-winning and internationally recognised expert on housing and placemaking and ESG, 20 years strategic advisory and investment experience, and up until July last year was placemaking and investment director at Thriving Investments, formerly P4P Capital, the fund and asset management arm of Places for People. In August 2024, Alex took over the chair of the Radix Big Tent Housing Commission from Dame Kate Barker and was the lead author on the first report, Beyond the Perma-Crisis, delivering 1,000 homes a day. Alex is passionate about enabling tangible social impact through innovation and collaboration, and you can see, therefore, why we are so excited to be able to introduce her to the stage this afternoon. Can you give me a big, warm round of applause for Alex as she comes to the stage?
Thank you, Jess. It's always a bit cringe to have your bio read out, but thank you. I wear lots of different hats, so and I'm very, very honoured to have been able to do all sorts of different things across the industry, in charity in the third sector, in private sector and investment side of things, in social housing and registered provider. And today I'm talking to you wearing my hat of the Radix Big Tent Housing Commission, which as Jessie said, I took over from Dame Kate Barker, and I'm sure many of you will remember the Barker Independent Review of Housing Supply for the Treasury just over 20 years ago. And actually, HBF last year published a report which kind of exasperatingly said that if all the recommendations had been adopted and followed, we'd have 2 million more homes in the UK. And actually, 11 of the 36 were still in place. 10 had been partially implemented and then kind of got rid of. And there's this slightly exasperating thing of like, we do know the solutions. And as Jess was saying earlier, for all the talk and the innovation, it's the lack of doing that is quite often the problem. But Radix had managed to persuade Kate to get together and actually have a commission kind of 20 years on looking at what could be done now in this context of what we called a perma-crisis. As all of you will know, as good students, a crisis is meant to be an instant kind of in time, not 40 years of just perennially getting worse. But we're trying to get past that perma-crisis vibe. I kind of use this slide quite often because when people say they work in, in real estate or property or the built environment, but the money side, where I've spent most of my career, is definitely the bad guys, right? And in my daughter's view, we are the nasty people in black suits who come along in Up and try and kick the guy out of his house, which is why he floats away on the balloons. And actually, I think it's really important, and all of the, we could spend hours going into all of these, and I'm sorry, I do talk quickly, but, you can have all these slides and you can go through them later. This is one of the reasons when we talk about ecosystem, which is one of my favourite words, it's so important because all of these elements here are really, really critical. And actually, frustratingly, in the past 40 years, what you have is politicians, regardless of party, all looking for silver bullet solutions, failing to factor in the unintended consequences that picking up on one thread will ripple around and make everywhere. So PD, for instance, permitted development, great idea in some cases, but actually, as the founding chair of the Creative Land Trust in London, I can tell you that that's decimated 20% of the affordable workspace in London out of the economy. So it really, really needs this integrated approach, this holistic view. Similarly, and I love this, I pinched this off Twitter, the old Twitter, I never know who actually came up with it. But there is this tendency for trends. Now, there's a backlash now against ESG, but actually, as this showed a few years ago, it was the bit that everybody wanted to get into. And right now, I would say, again, in the investment space, it's impact investing, and particularly impact investing in housing. It's this big tick that everybody wants to get to, so we'll come back to that. But I'm going to whiz you through some of the headline recommendations of the report. If you haven't seen it, you can use the QR code and you can access it there, but it's freely available if you use the magic of Google or other search engines, you can find it there. The thing I loved about the process, apart from getting to work with Kate, who is fabulous, is that it was a genuine multidisciplinary group of people. So we had people from the Self-Build Community Housing Trust. We had a representative from Vistry, really big house builders. We had Get Living, massive institutional rental players. We had long-standing political advisors like Jackie Sadek, who's a real guru of urban regeneration. And the whole point, it was framed around the fact that we weren't all going to agree on everything, and my God, we really didn't. There were some really fascinating debates, but that anything that we recommended would be agreed by a majority of the group. So it was very democratic. And actually, it was really cathartic. But when the election was announced a lot sooner than we expected, it kind of pivoted what was probably, if I'm honest, going to be another one of those think pieces that goes on the shelf and then sort of stays there, into this needs to be tangible recommendations, practical things that a new administration can do now. And so this housing ecosystem that I thought, we all talk about it if you've been in the industry a while. I thought someone, the LSE, Bartlett, Oxford, somebody somewhere must have written this and published it, and I can, cite it accordingly. And I couldn't find in all of my research a single kind of graphic of it. It's become a thing that is in the ether that we talk about, but hasn't really been set out in that massive detail, beyond obviously what's in the very good playbook. So trying to kind of do that, we put this together, and just really to help, particularly a new administration, and let's be honest, it's been fantastic to have a housing minister who knew what Homes England was before they started the job. That's a big plus. But actually just help have that continuity. So some of the recommendations, we kind of broke them into three big areas. One was kind of implementation and delivery, one was around funding, and one was around planning particularly. But a big bugbear, and I've heard this from a couple of people today, so I hope you guys might be on board with this, was that as someone who started my career in the civil service over 20 years ago, the real frustration is however much you move the deck chairs between different departments, housing is split and disaggregated between so many bits of government. It doesn't enable coherent decision making, and let alone a kind of 10-year policy. So actually we were really advocating to replicate the success of the Climate Change Committee, which has an independent statutory body, that we could do the same for housing, and actually with that have, anyone old enough to remember Prime Minister's Delivery Unit or PMDU, but something that's a practical body that is responsible for the data. One of the things in the report that's really quite worrying is that all the core sources that government used to collect on housing delivery and starts, finishes, a lot of the kind of central government functions were shut down. So you're really reliant on very patchy, very inconsistent data. So people don't really know. So we're really calling for that, just that overarching convening body that could be responsible and really drive through any of the policies that come through. We were asking for creating and implementing a UK housing strategy, which very pleasingly the Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner, has kicked off, and there's a team working on that at MHCRG. And we were pushing for, a bit of cross-party collaboration, we'll see. Facilitating the release of public sector land. Again, many of you will have seen this, and there's lots of great work done by Jez and the Housing Festival team on this in the playbook, but also campaigns like the NHS Homes Alliance. And not to get too geeky, but, a lot of this rests on the orthodoxy of Treasury budgets and RDEL and CDEL revenue and capital, and the lack of being able to develop on balance sheet. But actually unlocking that could be really, really key across a range of bodies, and where the MOD has just managed to acquire back their single service families accommodation portfolio from Annington in what was frankly a really, really terrible archetypal PFI deal, but has the potential to do something really significant there. That's a really exciting opportunity. Then again, along with all this fiscal devolution that we know is coming and is well underway now, a bit more specific support around housing for local and combined authorities. I know Joanne from Enfield, Joanne Drew, who was on the earlier panel, I don't know if she's still here, but speaks really, really articulately about how, frankly, it's a waste of time for her and her team to be applying for the many multifaceted, different, very small pots of funding that exist. But actually, it's just too much of bureaucracy. What you need is to streamline the access to that, just to have a bit of trust in the system with appropriate auditing and assessment, but actually allow local and combined authorities to get on with it and access to scale capital that could make a difference, not stuff that's so rigidly structured with so many conditions that you can't actually get anywhere, and it's not big enough amounts anyway. I think a lot of that ties into the kind of small sites work that Jez has been leading as well, of just allowing stuff to streamline that procurement. So the big players who might not bid for something don't get it, but are on the panels, versus small SME providers that really would love to do it but can't get through public procurement. Rethinking the role of Homes England. Again, this all happened before both the Peters announced their departure, but there is clearly some work underway there. So that's great. And I should say we did have Matthew Pennycook at our launch, and it was quite satisfying that he was waving our report around saying, on recommendation 6, we're doing this. On recommendation 7, we're doing that. So for all the reports that I've written in my life, this one is actually being used, which is quite cathartic. So yes, streamlining those existing funding pots and processes, recognising the importance of rental tenures. And I have spent 20 years banging on about the importance of rental, but it is a real frustration to me that in this country we do treat renters as second class. It's a second class tenure. Regardless of whether you're in social rent or key worker, intermediate or any kind of thing, it is deemed to be a holding pattern until you get on the ladder. And that entire idea is actually very much predicated on the 20 years of very low interest rates we've had as well. But so now not only are you having people who were maybe put all their savings and their family savings into buying and then have got stuck with a kind of mortgage that can no longer afford and have had to declare bankruptcy. So actually buying is not the route always to equity, but actually we have allowed renting to be a crap experience. And actually it is one of the only sectors I've seen where the professional and the private landlords are quite often saying, regulate us more, we're here, we're volunteering to sign a charter. There are, of course, bad actors, but we will do more. But let us be, we are part of the housing system. And I think recognising that rental importance is really key. And alongside that, the institutional investment in housing. And by that, I mean the pension funds, the sovereign wealth funds, the private equity, the range of capital that started in the UK coming into purpose-built student, sort of 20 odd years ago, but has really evolved into, all the kind of snazzily branded build-to-rent, co-living, retirement, whatever. But that capital, that is a lever that Kate Barker did not have 20 years ago that is really, really important because it can cornerstone against these longer-term investments. And actually the beauty of long-term renting to a high standard for an institutional landlord is they are massively invested in quality of product and retention. They want to keep the tenants. They don't want to be racking up the rents and changing it all the time, which is the kind of stereotype and the driver of a bad landlord. They want to look after, they want the tenants to stay. They want tenants to move and as their family grows or shrinks between units within their developments and be able to be part of a community. So it's not going to replace either private landlords or social rent or housing for sale, but it's a really important part of our housing mix. And actually it's under 1% of delivered housing at the moment. So there's huge potential. It's a horrible phrase, but there is a wall of capital. There is a massive weight of investable money that wants into this space, partly because post-COVID and everything else, that kind of realising that residential is a remarkably secure income. It delivers a very, relatively low, but very, very stable income stream. And when you've had all the volatility in the office market and the retail and everything else, there is this weight where people would not consider residential before, they now will. So that recognising that and government doing more with the institutional sector is really key. Clearly, everyone likes to bang on about 106 and all the things that are wrong with it, and everyone's got different views, but there's lots of good stuff there around the infrastructure levy, and I think it's really pleasing to see the infrastructure and planning bill coming forward linked to the devolution bill, that there's some good suggestions in there. we were jumping up and down about a prompt rent settlement, which happily came through like that the week that we launched the report. They had a little top-up yesterday. There's clearly a long way to go on that. There's more to do. But I think that the team, I would say, in MHCRG are well on board with that. So then we kind of got into all of the planning system. And Dr. Katrina Riddell, who is kind of our lead on this, she is the guru of strategic spatial planning. And she likes to talk about how planning shouldn't be a barrier. We've enabled, forced a lot of our local authority planners now really to be doing development control. When actually what a lot of planners want to get into it is actually the creativity and enabling stuff. And that Katrina likes to say planning should be about enabling growth, being the ringmasters of growth, she likes to call it. And so actually there's a huge amount of stuff here that I won't go into, but it's about re-entering strategic planning into the system, and that being aligned with getting rid of the 2 tiers, the multiplicity of county councils and the kind of too much governance in some places and not enough in others, going along with the devolution to combined authorities. There's a huge amount of work going on in this. But also to recognise that for anyone working in planning who's joined the profession since 2010, they won't have worked with strategic planning in a framework, so there's a lot of education that needs to be done. We called for an independent review of the Metropolitan Greenbelt, and again, that's a kind of being chugged along, and then lots of support for supporting SMEs and community land trusts and all the great stuff that is linking into the playbook, but also the Community Land Trust Network are doing, and lots of really specific ideas there. So we tried to go from kind of everything being tangible and not all asking for huge amounts of money, recognising it's not there. What I was really, really proud of was that actually we did get this support from a really broad variance of across the sector, that it wasn't just the planners or just the institutional investors, that we really did have support and engagement from a huge range of professional bodies. And also, I just wanted to touch on this quickly and then get into questions, but as I alluded to earlier, the benefits of impact investing being targeted towards housing in the UK. This is a real thing in the spotlight at the moment, particularly for pension funds. I used to have a huge argument with my FD when I worked at a large RP, because his view was, we're here, we're delivering social housing, therefore we are delivering impact. And again, well, no, that's our day job. That's what we're here for. The actual two words that are really, really key for impact investing are intentionality. It's on purpose. It's not just that there was a skate park there on the site that you happen to buy. And additionality. It's got to be in addition, extra to what you would have done anyway. Those are the 2 really key criteria for a genuine impact investment. So it's a targeted positive impact that would not otherwise have occurred. And so that is something that you're starting to see, that as the professionalisation of impact investing is coming, that really specific ask, and I know Andy's here from the Good Economy, can tell you how he'll assess it for you, but those are 2 really key things. Now, there's a lot of stuff in the market around a kind of bit stable door, horses bolted, but trying to kind of put a clearer baseline in around all of this, all these different metrics and bodies and things you can use. But fundamentally, in housing, the bit I wanted to leave you with is that there has been this massive shift in Better Society Capital, which was Big Society Capital, do a market sizing for impact investing in housing. And they came at the 2023 study, which they published last year, came out with a 12-fold increase in over 12 years. Basically, it's up to 10 billion now, out of absolutely nowhere. If you look at that just with a kind of local government pension fund lens, in 2010, under 1% of that income, our pensions, was invested in housing in the UK. Actually, a lot of it was invested in housing in other countries, but not here. So there's been a massive shift in pushing that up to nearly 20% now. The challenge, I would argue, and that people here need to think about, is that most of that is actually in shared ownership. Because from a viability point of view, that is much, much easier to get through an investment committee that is new to residential, new to the risks, believes all the negative stereotypes around social rent and the support services and the regulation, and are really concerned about that, sees shared ownership as something that can be tagged as affordable, but actually is a safer product. And so I think the real challenge is to make sure that this investment is coming into social rent as well as shared ownership. But yeah, that's a quick canter through.
Fabulous. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
We've got a few roving mics in the room as well, so anybody with a question for Alex, please do grab a hand up and we'll go from there. Stun them all into silence. It's quite impressive. Yes, in the middle, thank you. There's a microphone coming in behind you.
Thank you. Tim Adams, UK GVC. Finance seems to be a big part of this. The money's there, and it sounds like you're quite a finance person. I'm just wondering why there aren't more finance people here, and why can't those coffers be unleashed?
So Why they're not here, I mean, there are, as Jessica said earlier, there's a multiplicity of events and conferences, and, our industry, unfortunately, is extremely siloed, so they'll probably be retreated with their finance people talking about similar things in a slightly different lens. So I think it's always good to have more mixing across the professional boundaries. Why is it not there? So familiarity with the sector, as I said, it's really, really new. Also scales. One of the challenges with housing is the phenomenal granularity of it. And when you're talking about small sites or even a large site, but that might be, a couple of hundred homes, thousands over years, actually most institutional investors want to deploy large sums of money, hundreds of millions at a time. And so the granularity and the slowness of the delivery and the uncertainty around the planning don't lend themselves to that, when frankly at the moment, you can put your money into a government gilt, do absolutely nothing and get 4.5%, and then you sit and go, take all this risk, all this uncertainty, and all the complexity of delivering granular housing and having tenants in it who may or may not do what you're supposed to and need a lot of support, and oh, by the way, you might get 4% as well. It doesn't always stack up. So you are looking for those investors who can see the liability match, and that's where I think we started to see that tipping point with UK pension funds who could see that we are housing our customers. And actually, this is a really good, it's a diversification, but it allows us to kind of look into key worker housing first and then into shared ownership, and hopefully that will come down into social rent.
You've asked the question at the right time as well, because the next session in this room is all about risk, return and social impact, hosted by KPMG. Any other questions? Just at the back, just behind you.
Yeah, hi, thanks for that. It was great. My question is around, when you were going through the commission, did you think about the issue of land banking? I guess it's a sort of a bit of a cliched view that part of the reason we can't build homes is developers are banking all this land. Is that actually a problem? And were there any sort of recommendations linked to that?
I can't remember the page number, but there is a reference in the report to the markets, Competition and Markets Authority review of land banking, which came out and said, no, they're not really doing it. Actually, there are an awful lot of sites with consent that aren't being proceeded. And actually, again, this is the kind of challenge in the sector, is that viability is really, really complicated at the moment. So if you've got something that's consented 3 years ago, it may not be affordable or viable to do now. Terms may have changed. That's before you add things like biodiversity net gain, or if you're looking at a taller building, the kind of Building Safety Act is a huge issue. So it's all the kind of the ecosystem of things that need to be in place. So I think most of the, as you would expect them to, the large house builders will robustly argue that their strat land play is not land banking, and actually you can see that but equally theirs is a model predicated on scarcity. It's not in their interest to flood the market. They will phase it, drip feed it to maximise the price, and it's a democracy, and that's entirely legal for them to do that. But looking to them to solve the rest of the housing crisis is the kind of archetypal turkeys voting for Christmas. So we should be looking at other tenures and other types to kind of build that in. So no, I don't think it is the problem that it was being held up to be, and the CMA study is quite robust and fair in that. What is a challenge is getting consents that are viable.
Fabulous. One just down in the front here. Thanks, Jez.
Toby Fox from the Housing and Development Network. So you say that the funds are looking for scale of hundreds of millions, if not billions. I'm representing a network of housing companies that have a pipeline of something like 100,000 homes. Is that too small? Are they wasting their breath trying to attract institutional investment to something of that scale? And if it is, then how is this money going to filter through to the housing market?
So caveated with it depends, but it depends how those 100,000 are aggregated across. One of the presentations I gave to kind of a planning group the other day was just a bit about how an investment committee works, and it was really interesting because kind of going, even if you've got the best scheme in the world, if it's in Scotland and that fund is already what they would call overweight in Scotland, i.e. they've already invested more than 50% of their investment in that, in other things, which in Scotland could be energy generation, there's an awful lot of investment going into natural capital up there, then regardless of how brilliant your site is, they're not going to go for it because they will have specific proportionate allocations for their capital marked by geography. So it could be that you're hitting in some funds, they will just say, no, we're already overly invested in the southeast or the southwest, or we can't come here. So it would depend very much on the geography. It will depend on the operational strategy. There's lots of those kind of factors. So if 100,000 homes, but what's the tenure mix? Who's going to, what's the service charge arrangement for the sales elements? What's the rental management operation platform? Where's the risk sit? So it's not impossible, but it is a very long educational curve. I spent a lot of time pitching to kind of European pension funds, and they go, oh yeah, no, we can do asset management. We've done real estate, because under 5% of most global pension funds is in real estate, and most of that is commercial. And I sit there and go, oh, okay. And then you find that they'd run shopping centres in Poland, or that kind of big student buildings in Spain maybe. But they'd come back to you 3 months later and go, what the hell is the Landlord and Tenant Act? And I'm like, well, would you like to listen now? So, the granularity of what we have to deal with in management, and that risk factor is a big challenge to persuading people to the cause of it. But once they can get on board with that, once they can see all the impact that you can have, and actually that because they are long-term investors, as opposed to the kind of 3 to 5 year IRR-driven kind of traditional house builder model, if you can get that patient capital, then actually they will see huge benefits, because you can evidence that there is a premium in investing in place, not just in the units themselves. You can evidence that from a range of sources, that it does create much better outcomes, both for the residents, but actually for the wider communities. So I think it is coming, but it is an ongoing education process.
Brilliant, thank you. Any other questions? Oh, right in the back corner. Ellen, would you mind? Thank you so much. Keep going further, right to the end.
Hi, Alex. You mentioned about the Competitions and Markets Authority report and the issue of absorption rates, and the market-led model being sort of restrained according to prices. It seems that affordable housing is key to increase overall supply as well as meeting need. Be really interested to hear a bit more about what you were saying about how to get more institutional investment into the low-cost rent tenures, social rent. You mentioned a sort of step between shared ownership, intermediate rent, then social rent. What is the key to channel that money into the homes that we really need?
So when I first joined Places for People 10 years ago, and I said, I've worked in housing, but I've not worked in social housing specifically. Can somebody give me the document that sets out all the rent levels, social rent levels in the UK? And they went, no, you just have to learn it. And I was like, okay. Right, so the incredibly individualistic way that rents are negotiated makes things very complicated. One of the funds that we did when I was at PFP, which became Thriving Investments, was in Scotland, because in Scotland, very helpfully in their planning system, they have a tenure called mid-market rent, which is income assessed, and it's targeting, it's not social rent, but it's targeting incomes between 20 and 45,000. So it is some kind of doctors, firefighters, it is your key worker designation in those key markets around places like Edinburgh and Glasgow that are just extremely unaffordable. And that was something where, because it was in the tenure, so there wasn't going to be a debate in the planning. The Scottish Government had been very explicit in wanting more of that particular tenure. We could be certain on what the rental increases would be, CPI +1, and we could model that in, and so we could show what returns were going to be, and we could build it. That was actually not easy, but we could get that funded. So we got 285 million, and that's got, when I last checked, it's got 1,400 homes, 500 are built and occupied, and the rest are kind of coming through the system now. So that in that sort of segment was much easier to do. And replicating in England requires you to have a hugely detailed negotiation with the local authority, the combined authority, to set the rent levels, to kind of agree, a huge amount of other things, agree where in the sliding scale that the social rent contribution also needs to go in. It can't just be key worker rent. And so it just becomes greater risk. And so I think that is one of the challenges for investors, that it's not that they're not willing to engage, but there is no clarity, there is no certainty on what the terms of engagement are. It varies entirely by where you go. And so that is something that is a big barrier to investment, or at least it slows it down.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I guess, is there an issue about rent certainty for social rent and the challenge of providing homes to people with lowest incomes versus providing certainty on rental inflation for investors?
Well, okay, so the challenge on social rent, not even for an investor, for an RP, someone's like, you can see that 85% of RPs have stopped their development programme, right? But, they are being buffeted by Building Safety Act, by the ESG requirements, by the damper mod, the legacy of, for whatever reason, it's across the whole sector, a focus on preserving margin, but not investing in the repairs and maintenance in the way that should have been done. And you add on to that the fact that the social rent grant that is required has been operating on fumes for at least a decade, and it does not cover. It requires subsidy. Social rent requires subsidy, and the government subsidy there does not cover it. I don't know if any of you remember when Notting Hill Genesis, maybe it was pre the pre the pandemic, but announced that they were no longer going to do social rent and were only going to do shared ownership. And there was an outcry because they said they shouldn't be allowed to keep their RP status. I think if you again look at all the FPRPs that are coming, the for-profit RPs, most of them are geared towards shared ownership because it is designated affordable, but it generates a slightly higher margin. So the shortfall is still there, but it's not as big. So the fundamental numbers with social rent, however much we all know it's needed and it's wanted, and I loudly applaud all the work that's being done to get the Treasury to understand the waste of money over here on temporary accommodation is directly linked to the failure to invest in social rent. If we can actually break that barrier, that will be transformative, and that will enable institutional capital to invest. But at the moment, it doesn't stack up. And you can't throw money at something as an investor hat on when you're regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. Your primary objective is the fiduciary duty to your shareholders, the fiduciary duty to your investors, which, by the way, if it's local government pensions, is all of us. It's our money. So you don't want them throwing it into something that isn't going to make you a return and leave you nothing to live on in your retirement. So it's complicated, and I think breaking down that silo around the temporary accommodation, social rent, where it sits on the spreadsheet, and actually recognising that that investment is needed. Now, I'm a big advocate that we need to go back to councils building council housing, but we also need to enable RPs to look after the social rent housing that they do have and to repair and maintain it. And so the decarbonisation funds, help. There's lots of partners like LNG doing really good stuff to try and, what would have been old-fashioned stock transfers. They're trying to kind of work out more creative ways to do that so RPs can keep them on their balance sheet, but they can get the funding for the decarbonisation. So there's lots of great innovative conversations happening. But fundamentally, however much we know we need it, social rent doesn't stack. And that is the barrier we've got to get past.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm going to pause us there. We are running out of time, but can you join me in saying a massive thank you to Alex for joining us today? Alex has got a fabulous understanding of something so complex. Getting a bit of a window of insight into her view of things is just brilliant.